Sometimes the loneliest souls find each other in the darkest moments. Sometimes trust blooms where fear should reign. Lord Thorne had lived 3 centuries alone in his crumbling castle, feeding only when hunger threatened madness. On this storm-torn night, a dying woman collapsed at his gates. She was fevered and desperate, with nowhere left to turn. She should have feared him. Instead, she fell asleep against his chest, trusting completely. For the first time in 300 years, Thorne faced a choice that could damn or redeem his soul. What would you do if saving someone meant revealing the monster you've become? Before we continue, tell us where you're listening from, and if this story moves you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The candle flames flickered in the drafty chamber as Lord Thorne stood before the tall windows of his castle, watching the storm lash the countryside below. Lightning illuminated the village of Ravenshollow in brief, stark moments, thatched roofs bent under the weight of rain, muddy streets running like rivers, and the occasional figure hurrying through the darkness with a lantern held close. 300 years. 3 centuries of watching seasons change, plagues come and go, generations live and die while he remained unchanged. The weight of immortality pressed upon his shoulders like a stone cloak he could never remove. The castle had been grand once, when he was mortal, when he had been Sir Edmund Thorne, Knight of the Realm, defender of the innocent. The great hall below had echoed with laughter then, filled with warmth and light, and the woman whose memory still haunted every shadow. Now cobwebs draped the tapestries like funeral shrouds, and dust motes danced in the pale moonlight that filtered through cracked, stained glass. He moved with fluid grace to his writing desk, where maps of the surrounding lands lay scattered among leather-bound journals. His fingers, pale as marble, cold as winter stone, traced the borders of his domain. Once, these lands had flourished under his protection. Now they served merely as hunting grounds, carefully managed to sustain him while drawing no attention to his presence. The transformation had come in the plague year of 1324. He remembered it with the crystal clarity that immortality cursed him with every detail, sharp as broken glass. Catherine had fallen ill first, her beautiful face flushed with fever, her dark hair damp with perspiration as she lay in their marriage bed. He had held her hand as she slipped away, whispering promises he could not keep, watching helplessly as the woman he loved more than his own soul faded into death. The vampire had come for him in his grief. Not the romantic figure of legend, but something ancient and terrible, drawn by the scent of despair. It had offered him a choice in the ruins of his shattered life: join Catherine in death, or live forever with the memory of her love. In his madness and sorrow, he had chosen immortality, believing somehow that eternal life would bring him closer to her spirit. How wrong he had been. The curse brought only hunger and endless, gnawing need that could be satisfied only by the life force of others. But Edmund Thorne, even transformed into something monstrous, retained his moral core. He had established rules for himself from the beginning: feed only when absolutely necessary, take only from those whose loss would cause minimal suffering, and never ever take an innocent life. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk with careful precision, revealing a small wooden box lined with faded velvet. Inside lay a simple gold band. Catherine's wedding ring, the only physical reminder of their brief, perfect marriage. He lifted it with reverent fingers, feeling its weight as if it held not just gold, but the essence of every moment they had shared. "My beloved," he whispered to the empty room, "how I have missed your counsel." The ring caught the candlelight, throwing tiny reflections on the stone walls. He remembered slipping it onto her finger on their wedding day, remembered her laugh as he fumbled with nervous hands, remembered the way she had kissed him to still his trembling. She had been everything good and pure in the world, a healer by nature, always tending to the sick and wounded who came to their door, always seeing the best in people, even when they showed her their worst. Thunder crashed outside, pulling him from his reverie. He returned the ring to its sanctuary and closed the drawer with a soft click. The storm was worsening, and storms always brought the desperate to his gates. Usually they were thieves or refugees seeking shelter, easily turned away with a stern warning. Sometimes they were more dangerous visitors, vampire hunters, following old legends, treasure seekers drawn by tales of ancient wealth hidden in his walls. He had dealt with all types over the centuries, always carefully, always ensuring that his true nature remained hidden. Isolation was his protection, solitude his shield against discovery. The villagers below knew only that a reclusive lord lived in the old castle, occasionally seen on moonlit nights, never socializing but never causing trouble either. The plague had returned to Ravenshollow 3 months ago. Thorne watched from his windows as families were torn apart. As the village healer, an elderly woman named Agnes worked herself to exhaustion, trying to save lives with herbs and prayers that proved insufficient against the disease's relentless advance. He had considered intervening, using his supernatural knowledge to help, but such action would raise questions he could not answer. Instead, he had maintained his vigil, observing human suffering with the detached sorrow of one who had seen too much pain across too many years. The plague would run its course, as it always did. Some would survive, some would perish, and life would continue its eternal cycle while he remained frozen outside its natural rhythm. A sharp crack of thunder made him turn toward the windows again. The storm was reaching its peak, transforming the night into a chaos of wind and water. Through the rain-lashed glass, he could barely make out the winding path that led up to his castle gates. In all his years of isolation, very few had been brave or desperate enough to attempt that treacherous climb during such weather. He moved through the castle with the silence that had become second nature, his footsteps making no sound on the worn stone floors. The great hall stretched before him, empty chairs arranged around a long table where no meals had been shared for centuries. Portraits of long-dead ancestors gazed down from the walls with painted eyes that seemed to judge his eternal existence. In the kitchen, he paused before a cabinet that held his carefully maintained supplies. Not food, he had no need for mortal sustenance, but the tools and knowledge of healing that he had accumulated over 300 years of reluctant existence. Books on anatomy and medicine, bottles of tinctures and remedies, instruments for surgery that he had learned to use with supernatural precision. Knowledge gathered not from choice but from necessity, as his feeding had taught him more about the human body than any physician could hope to know. He selected a few items almost without thinking: a vial of fever reducer, clean cloth for bandages, a bottle of purified water. Some instinct, honed by centuries of careful observation, told him that tonight would be different. Tonight, the storm would bring something more than just wind and rain to his door. The feeling proved prophetic when he heard the sound faint at first, nearly lost in the howling wind, but unmistakably human. A voice calling out, weak and desperate, from somewhere beyond his gates. He moved swiftly to the highest tower, where ancient glass windows provided a clear view of the approach to his castle. Lightning flashed, and in that brief moment of illumination he saw her. A woman, collapsed at his gates, her body barely visible against the rain-soaked stone. She wore a dark cloak that clung to her form like a second skin, and even from this distance he could sense her weakness, her fever, her desperate struggle against forces beyond her control. She was not young, somewhere in her 40s, perhaps with the bearing of someone who had known both joy and sorrow, who had lived fully in the world from which he had exiled himself. Something about her struck him with unexpected force. Perhaps it was the way she had managed to reach his gates despite the storm, showing a determination that spoke of strength beneath her obvious fragility. Perhaps it was simply that after so many years of isolation, the sight of another human being in distress awakened emotions he had thought safely buried. Whatever the reason, Thorne found himself moving. Through the castle toward the main entrance, his supernatural speed carrying him down staircases and through corridors with purpose he had not felt in decades. At the heavy wooden doors that sealed his sanctuary from the outside world, he paused, one hand on the ancient iron handle. 3 centuries of solitude had taught him caution. Every interaction with mortals carried risks. The risk of discovery, the risk of attachment, the risk of causing harm despite his best intentions. Opening these doors meant opening himself to possibilities he had long ago decided were too dangerous to consider. But the woman outside was dying. He could sense it with the supernatural awareness that was both blessing and curse of his condition. If he did nothing, she would perish on his doorstep, another victim of the plague that had already claimed so many lives in the village below. The choice, when it came, felt inevitable. He opened the doors. The woman lay crumpled against his gates like a broken bird, her leather satchel clutched protectively against her chest, even in unconsciousness. Rain had soaked through her woolen cloak, turning the deep brown fabric black as midnight, and her breathing came in shallow, labored gasps that spoke of fever and exhaustion. Thorne approached with supernatural silence, his enhanced senses immediately cataloguing every detail of her condition. The scent of herbs clung to her despite the rain, chamomile, willow bark, elderflower marking her as someone familiar with healing arts. Her hands, visible where they gripped the satchel, bore the telltale stains of plant medicines and the small scars that came from years of gathering wild remedies. She was perhaps 45 years old, with auburn hair streaked with premature silver that caught the lightning's glow. Her face, flushed with fever but still showing the remnants of quiet beauty, held lines of care and compassion that spoke of a life spent in service to others. Even in her current state, there was something dignified about her bearing, something that reminded him achingly of, no, he pushed the memory away before it could fully form. 3 centuries had taught him the danger of seeing Catherine in every woman's face, of searching for her ghost in the living world. But as he knelt beside the stranger, studying her features more closely, the resemblance struck him again with unexpected force. Not in the exact arrangement of features, this woman's face was rounder, her nose more prominent, but in the expression of gentle strength that persisted even in unconsciousness. The same expression Catherine had worn when tending to the sick and injured, when facing suffering with quiet courage. "Please," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. Her eyes fluttered open, green as forest moss, bright with fever but still alert. "I seek Lord Thorne," they said. They said he might help. Her words sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the rain. No one had spoken his name in decades. The villagers below knew only vague legends of a reclusive noble, not the specific identity he had once claimed. "Who told you to seek me?" he asked, keeping his voice carefully neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in his mind. She struggled to sit up, her movement clumsy with weakness. "Agnes, the village healer. Before the fever took her, she said there were old stories, old knowledge hidden in these hills. Said if anyone might know how to stop the plague, it would be the lord of the ancient castle, Agnes." He remembered the elderly woman had watched her through his windows, tending to the sick with tireless devotion until the disease claimed her as well. If she had sent someone here, it meant the situation in the village had become desperate indeed. "I am Eleanor," the woman continued, her voice gaining strength even as her body trembled with cold and fever. "Eleanor Hartwell. I am the healer who came to assist Agnes before she died. The plague has taken my husband, my neighbors, so many children." Her voice broke slightly, but she pressed on with admirable determination. "I have nowhere else to turn. The old remedies are not enough. People are dying, and I cannot save them with what I know." The pain in her voice resonated through him like a struck bell. Here was someone who understood the weight of failing to save those you cared about, someone who carried the burden of helplessness in the face of death. Her husband gone to the same disease that had taken Catherine 3 centuries ago. "You should not have come here," he said, though his words lacked conviction. The storm alone could have killed you. Eleanor managed a weak smile that transformed her fever-flushed features. Perhaps, but staying in the village would have meant watching more people die while I did nothing. I would rather risk death in seeking help than accept it in despair. Her courage stirred something in him that had long lain dormant. This was not some desperate fool seeking treasure or shelter, but a woman willing to sacrifice herself for the chance to save others. A healer, like Catherine had been. Like Catherine, facing impossible odds with quiet determination, the hunger stirred within him, as it always did in the presence of human weakness. She was perfect, prey isolated, weakened by illness, with no one to miss her if she simply disappeared into the storm. The beast that lived in his chest whispered of how easy it would be, how sweet her life force would taste, how her healer's knowledge would add rich flavor to the feeding. He pushed the hunger down with practiced discipline, but it fought back harder than usual. He had not fed in months, sustaining himself on the blood of forest animals and the occasional criminal foolish enough to venture into his domain. His supernatural strength was at low ebb, his control more fragile than it had been in decades. Eleanor's eyes began to close again, her brief burst of strength fading. "I'm sorry to have troubled you, my lord. If you cannot help, perhaps you might allow me shelter until the storm passes. I'll not burden you longer than—" Her words were cut off as another wave of fever struck her. She collapsed fully against the stone gateway, her breathing becoming dangerously shallow. Thorne's enhanced hearing detected the irregular rhythm of her heartbeat, the subtle signs that her body was losing its battle against the disease. She was dying. Here, at his feet, this woman who had risked everything to save others was succumbing to the same plague that had claimed his beloved 3 centuries ago. History repeating itself with cruel precision, offering him the chance to watch helplessly as another healer perished for want of aid he could provide, but dared not give. The choice crystallized in that moment, with startling clarity. He could let her die, the safe choice, the choice that maintained his isolation and protected his secrets. Or he could act, knowing that salvation would require revealing at least part of his true nature. Eleanor stirred slightly, her hand reaching out as if seeking comfort in her delirium. Her fingers brushed against his wrist where he knelt beside her, and the simple touch sent an electric shock through his entire being. Not the predatory thrill of potential prey, but something far more dangerous, the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone whose loss would diminish the world. Without conscious decision, Thorne gathered Eleanor into his arms with supernatural gentleness. She was lighter than he expected, her body burning with fever despite the cold rain. As he lifted her, she instinctively turned toward his chest, seeking warmth and comfort with the unconscious trust of someone too ill to fear. Her head came to rest against his heart, the heart that still beat, though it no longer required blood to pump. Her breathing, already labored, seemed to ease slightly, as if his presence brought some measure of peace. In that moment, with a dying woman cradled against him in perfect trust, Thorne felt something crack inside his chest. Not his heart, but the walls he had built around it over 3 centuries of careful isolation. The hunger roared within him, demanding that he feed while she was helpless and willing. But louder than the beast's voice was another sound, Catherine's voice, remembered across the years, speaking words of compassion and healing. Reminding him of the man he had been before, the curse transformed him into something monstrous. Eleanor murmured something against his chest, words lost in the storm but conveying gratitude and trust that shattered his remaining defenses. Here was someone who had sought him out not for personal gain but to save others, someone willing to trust a stranger in her darkest hour. For the first time in 300 years, Lord Thorne made a choice that had nothing to do with hunger or survival or careful self-preservation. As he carried Eleanor through the entrance of his castle, feeling her fevered body relax in his arms, he committed himself to an act that would change both their fates forever. He would not merely offer her shelter until the storm passed. He would save her life, no matter what it cost him, and in saving her, perhaps he might find a way to save himself. Eleanor woke to warmth and the scent of burning cedar. Consciousness returned slowly, like emerging from deep water, bringing with it the gradual awareness that she was no longer dying. The fever that had consumed her for days had broken, leaving her weak but clear-headed for the first time since the plague had taken hold. She lay in a bed far more comfortable than any she had known, soft linens that smelled of lavender, thick woolen blankets that held warmth without weight. Candlelight flickered from several sources around what appeared to be a well-appointed chamber, its stone walls hung with tapestries that spoke of wealth and refined taste. The memories came back in fragments. The desperate journey through the storm, collapsing at the castle gates, a man's voice speaking with careful courtesy, strong arms lifting her with surprising gentleness. Lord Thorne, if indeed it had been, he had not turned her away as she had half expected. "You're awake." The voice came from somewhere to her left, deep and cultured, with an accent she could not quite place. "How do you feel?" Eleanor turned her head carefully, mindful of lingering weakness, and saw him sitting in a chair beside the bed. He was younger than she had expected, or perhaps ageless was a better word. His features held the kind of classical beauty found in old portraits, with dark hair and pale skin that seemed to catch the candlelight. His clothes were simple but well-made, dark fabrics that suggested both wealth and a preference for avoiding attention. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, grey as storm clouds, holding depths that spoke of experience far beyond his apparent years. Kind eyes, she realized with some surprise. Whatever she had expected from the mysterious lord of the mountain castle, it had not been kindness. "Much better. Thank you," she replied, attempting to sit up. He moved quickly to help her, adjusting pillows behind her back with the practiced ease of someone familiar with caring for the ill. "How long have I been here?" 3 days, he said, settling back into his chair. "The fever broke yesterday evening. I was beginning to worry that my remedies would prove insufficient." Eleanor looked at him more carefully, noting details that had escaped her fevered first impression. His hands, which had touched her so gently, bore small stains similar to her own, the telltale marks of someone who worked with medicinal plants. There was something else too, an alertness in his posture that suggested he was ready to leap into action at the first sign of relapse. "You have medical knowledge," she observed. It was not a question. A shadow crossed his features, so brief she might have imagined it. "Some. I have had occasion to learn over the years. When one lives in isolation, such knowledge becomes necessary." "What remedies did you use?" Professional curiosity overcame social courtesy. "I've tried everything I know for the plague fever, willow bark, elderberry, even some of the old hedge witch preparations my grandmother taught me. Nothing has been as effective as what you've done." Lord Thorne was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "A combination of things. Some common herbs used in uncommon ways. Some techniques that are less widely known." There was something evasive in his response, but Eleanor was too grateful to press the point. Instead, she gestured toward a small table near the window, where she could see familiar shapes, bottles and vials, arranged with the precision of an experienced healer. "You have an impressive collection," she said. "Some of those preparations look ancient." "I am a collector of old knowledge," he admitted, "particularly knowledge related to healing and medicine. It has been a pursuit of mine for many years." Eleanor studied the collection more closely, recognizing some items that made her breath catch. "Is that distilled quicksilver? And that blue bottle that looks like processed antimony? These are alchemical preparations, not common herb work. You have a keen eye." There was approval in his voice, the recognition of one professional acknowledging another. "Your training was thorough." "My grandmother was what some called a cunning woman," Eleanor said carefully. "She taught me that healing knowledge comes from many sources, not all of them accepted by conventional wisdom. I learned early to keep an open mind about what might help the sick. Something in Thorne's expression shifted, became more open, a wise philosophy. I have found that the most effective remedies often come from sources that others fear to explore. They looked at each other across the small space between bed and chair, and Eleanor felt a connection forming the recognition between two people who understood that healing required both compassion and courage, the willingness to venture beyond safe boundaries if it meant saving lives. "My lord," Eleanor said carefully, "I must ask, the people in Raven's Hollow are still dying. Agnes is gone, and I am the only healer left to them. If you have knowledge that could help, you wish to return to them." His voice held no surprise, but something that might have been regret. "Of course you do. It is what a true healer would do. You disapprove." "I think," Thorne said slowly, "that you are not yet strong enough for such work. The plague is virulent, and you have barely recovered from your own brush with it. To expose yourself again so soon would be courting death." Eleanor pushed herself more upright, ignoring the way. The room swayed slightly. "With respect, my lord, people are dying while we speak. Children are losing parents. Families are being destroyed. I cannot remain here in comfort while that suffering continues. Even if returning means your own death, even so." The words came without hesitation. "I became a healer to serve others, not to preserve myself at their expense." Thorne was silent for a long time, studying her with those storm-grey eyes. Eleanor had the strange sense that he was seeing something in her that reminded him of another time, another person. When he spoke again, his voice held a note of wonder that seemed to surprise him. "You would truly risk everything for people who cannot repay you, who may not even appreciate the sacrifice?" "Of course." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Wouldn't you?" Another long silence, this one charged with meaning she could not quite grasp. Finally, Thorne rose from his chair and moved to the collection of medical supplies. He selected several items with careful precision: bottles of prepared tinctures, packages of processed herbs, implements she did not recognize. "If you are determined to return to this work," he said without turning around, "then you will need better resources than what you currently possess. The standard remedies are insufficient against this particular strain of plague." Eleanor's heart leaped. "You'll share your knowledge?" "I will do more than that." Thorne turned back to her, and in his eyes she saw something that looked like a decision being made. "If you are willing to accept help from someone whose methods may seem unconventional, I will work with you to save your village. You would come with me?" "It seems," he said quietly, "that isolation has served its purpose in my life. Perhaps it is time to remember what it means to serve something greater than mere survival." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, not from weakness, but from relief and gratitude that threatened to overwhelm her. "Thank you, my lord. You cannot know what this means." "Thorne," he said, "please, if we are to work together as healers, then we are equals in this endeavor. Call me Thorne." "Thorne," she repeated, tasting the name. It felt right somehow, strong and honest, like the man who bore it. "And I am Eleanor." Eleanor. The way he said her name sent a small warmth through her that had nothing to do with gratitude. "We have much work ahead of us." Over the following days, Eleanor's strength returned with remarkable speed. Thorne's remedies had done more than simply break her fever. They had restored her vitality in ways that conventional medicine could not explain. She found herself able to walk the castle's halls without weakness, to think clearly about complex medical preparations, to feel genuinely well for the first time since the plague had arrived in Raven's Hollow. Yet something kept her from immediately demanding to return to the village. Perhaps it was gratitude for Thorne's care, or perhaps it was professional fascination with his extensive collection of healing knowledge. More likely, though Eleanor was reluctant to admit it even to herself, it was the growing sense that she had found something in this remote castle that she had not even known she was seeking. Thorne proved to be an engaging companion, far different from the mysterious recluse she had expected. He was well-read and thoughtful, with insights into medicine and natural philosophy that suggested years of serious study. More than that, he listened to her ideas with genuine respect, treating her not as a village woman playing at healing, but as a fellow practitioner whose knowledge had value. They spent long hours in what he called his study, a chamber filled with books and scrolls and bottles of prepared medicines, where afternoon light filtered through tall windows to illuminate their discussions of treatment methods and diagnostic techniques. Eleanor had never had such conversations before, had never met anyone who shared her passion for healing with such depth of understanding. "You mentioned your grandmother taught you," Thorne said during one such discussion, carefully measuring dried herbs into a preparation bowl. "Was she your only teacher?" "My primary teacher," Eleanor replied, grinding willow bark with practiced motions. "Though my husband also taught me much about the practical aspects of village healing, he was not formally trained, but he had a gift for understanding what people needed when they were suffering." She had not mentioned her husband before, and she saw Thorne's hands still for just a moment before resuming their careful work. "He supported your calling?" "More than supported it, he encouraged it, even when others in the village thought it unseemly for a married woman to be so involved in healing work." Eleanor's voice softened with memory. "Thomas believed that knowledge was meant to be used in service of others. He would often accompany me on difficult calls, helping to carry supplies or comfort family members while I worked. He sounds like a good man." He was. Eleanor felt the familiar ache of loss, though time and the necessity of focusing on others' needs had dulled its sharpest edge. "The plague took him early, in the first wave. I think he would have approved of what we're doing here, this sharing of knowledge to help others." Thorne was quiet for a long moment, his attention apparently focused entirely on his preparations. But Eleanor sensed something deeper in his stillness, a recognition that spoke of his own experience with loss. "You understand," she said gently. "You've lost someone important to you." He looked up at her then, those storm-grey eyes holding a depth of pain that made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he would deflect the observation, change the subject as he had done when she asked about the source of his medical knowledge. Instead, he set down his measuring tools and moved to a cabinet she had not noticed before. From within it, he withdrew a small framed portrait, handling it with the reverence usually reserved for religious relics. He studied it for a moment before turning it toward Eleanor, and she found herself looking at the painted face of a woman of extraordinary beauty. The portrait was old. The style and technique spoke of craftsmanship from centuries past, but the subject seemed to glow with life, even in the static medium of paint. Dark hair framed delicate features, and brown eyes looked out from the canvas with an expression of gentle wisdom that reminded Eleanor powerfully of something she could not quite place. "Catherine," Thorne said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My wife." Eleanor studied the portrait more closely, noting the quality of the work and the obvious love that had gone into its creation. "She's beautiful." The artist captured something special. "She looks like someone who truly cared about others." "She was a healer," Thorne said, confirming Eleanor's instinct. "The finest I have ever known. She had a gift for seeing not just the illness, but the person suffering from it, for understanding that healing required compassion as much as knowledge." Something in his phrasing caught Eleanor's attention. "You speak of her as if you knew other healers, comparing her skill to theirs." "I have had occasion to observe many practitioners over the years," Thorne said carefully. "Catherine surpassed them all." Eleanor noticed that he had not answered her real question, how he could have known so many healers, how he could speak with such authority about medical practices across what seemed to be a considerable span of time. But the pain in his voice when he spoke of Catherine made her reluctant to press for details. "The plague took her too," she said instead. It was not a question. She could read the truth in his expression. "Yes." The single word carried the weight of decades. I was helpless to save her. Despite all my resources, all my determination, I watched her fade away as you nearly did, and I could do nothing but hold her hand as she slipped beyond my reach. Eleanor set down her own work and moved closer, drawn by the raw grief in his voice. She had counseled many people through loss, but something about Thorne's pain struck her as different, not just deep, but somehow vast, as if it had had time to settle into the very foundations of his being. "How long ago?" she asked gently. Another pause, longer this time. "Long enough that I should have found peace with it. Yet it feels as fresh as yesterday." Eleanor looked again at the portrait, then at Thorne's face, noting details that had puzzled her before. The painting was clearly very old, but Thorne appeared to be a man in his 30s. Either he had inherited the portrait from an ancestor, or she pushed the thought away as ridiculous. Some families simply aged well, and grief could preserve certain expressions across generations. "She reminds me of you," Thorne said suddenly, his gaze moving between Eleanor and the portrait. "Not in appearance, but in spirit. The way you speak about healing, about serving others regardless of personal cost. The way you were willing to risk your life in that storm to seek help for your village." Eleanor felt a strange flutter in her chest at his words, a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude, and everything to do with the way he was looking at her, as if she were someone precious, someone worthy of the comparison he was making. "Is that why you saved me?" she asked. "Because I reminded you of her?" Thorne returned the portrait to its place in the cabinet with careful hands. "Perhaps it began that way," he admitted, "but it has become something more. You are not Catherine, Eleanor. You are yourself a remarkable woman whose courage and skill deserve to be celebrated in their own right." The flutter in her chest intensified, becoming something she had not felt since Thomas's death, the recognition of attraction, of possibility, of a connection that transcended mere friendship or professional respect. "Thorne," she began, not certain what she wanted to say. "Yes, thank you for sharing her memory with me. It explains much about the man you are." He smiled then, the first truly unguarded expression she had seen from him. "And thank you, Eleanor, for reminding me that healing others can heal the healer as well." The truth revealed itself gradually, like dawn breaking over distant mountains. Eleanor was too observant, too skilled in the healer's art of noticing subtle details, for Thorne to maintain his careful deceptions indefinitely. The signs accumulated over their days together, small inconsistencies that individually meant nothing but together painted a picture that challenged everything she thought she knew about the world. He never ate in her presence, always finding reasons to excuse himself during mealtimes. His skin remained uniformly pale despite their afternoon sessions near the tall windows, never showing the flush of warmth that sunlight brought to normal complexions. His movements held a fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural, and his strength, when he helped her move heavy volumes or rearrange furniture, was far greater than his lean frame should have possessed. Most telling of all was his knowledge, not just the breadth of it, which might be explained by extensive study, but the intimate familiarity he showed with medical techniques that Eleanor knew had been lost for generations. He spoke of ancient remedies as if he had personally witnessed their preparation, described historical plague outbreaks with the precision of someone who had lived through them rather than simply read about them. The realization came to her on their 5th morning together as she watched him examine a small silver crucifix she wore around her neck. She had removed it while preparing a particularly delicate tincture, and when she moved to put it back on, she noticed his complete lack of reaction to the holy symbol. "Thorne," she said carefully, holding the crucifix where he could see it clearly, "does this trouble you at all?" He looked at the cross with mild curiosity, showing none of the fear or revulsion that folklore attributed to his kind. "Should it? It's a beautiful piece of craftsmanship. The silverwork is particularly fine." Eleanor studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or discomfort. She found none, only genuine puzzlement at her question. Either the legends were wrong about such things, or Thorne was something different from the monsters described in village tales. "How old are you?" she asked abruptly. The question hung in the air between them like a suspended blade. Thorne went very still, and Eleanor saw something flicker across his features: surprise, calculation, perhaps a touch of fear. "That's an unusual question," he said finally. "You're an unusual man." Eleanor set down the crucifix and faced him directly. "I'm a healer, Thorne. I notice things. I observe how people move, how they breathe, how their bodies respond to light and temperature and stress. And I've been watching you very carefully. Eleanor, your skin never warms in the sunlight. You never eat or drink anything in my presence. Your knowledge of medical practices spans what would have to be centuries of accumulated learning. You speak of historical events as if you witnessed them personally." She paused, gathering courage for the question that would either confirm her growing suspicion or reveal her as a fool. "What are you?" Thorne was silent for a long moment, and Eleanor could see a struggle playing out behind his grey eyes, the warring impulses of truth and self-preservation, of trust and caution. When he finally spoke, his voice held a weight of resignation that spoke of secrets too long carried alone. "What do you think I am?" "I think," Eleanor said slowly, "that you are someone who has lived far longer than any natural lifespan would allow. Someone who sustains himself in ways that conventional understanding cannot explain. Someone who has accumulated centuries of knowledge and experience while remaining unchanged by the passage of time. And what would you call such a person?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "I would call him a vampire." The word fell between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples of consequence in all directions. Thorne's expression did not change, but Eleanor sensed something fundamental, shifting in the air around them, the dissolution of pretense, the acknowledgement of a truth that would redefine everything about their relationship. "You should be afraid," Thorne said quietly. "You should be running from this place, seeking sanctuary in your village, warning others about the monster in their midst." "Should I? Should I?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Perhaps, if you were the monster that folklore describes. But I've spent days in your company, Thorne. I've seen how you treat the sick, how you handle healing supplies with reverence, how you speak of your lost wife with enduring love. Whatever you are not the creature of nightmare that people fear. You don't understand what I am capable of," Thorne said, and for the first time since she had known him, his voice held a note of genuine warning. "The hunger that drives me, the temptation your presence creates. You have no idea how close you came to death that night you collapsed at my gates." "But I didn't die," Eleanor replied calmly. "You chose to save me instead of whatever it is you normally do to survive. That choice tells me more about your true nature than any folklore could." Thorne moved away from her, pacing to the window with the restless energy of a caged predator. "I feed on human life force, Eleanor. Blood specifically, though I have learned to sustain myself on animal blood when necessary. I am stronger and faster than any mortal man. I do not age, and I will outlive you by centuries, even if you reach the end of a natural lifespan." "How do you feed?" Eleanor asked, her healer's curiosity overcoming any fear she might have felt. "Do you kill?" "I have killed," Thorne admitted, his voice heavy with old guilt. "In the early years, before I learned control, before I developed the moral constraints that now govern my existence. But for more than 2 centuries, I have taken life only when absolutely necessary, and only from those whose deaths would cause minimal suffering. Criminals, usually. The violent and unrepentant." Eleanor absorbed this information with the same careful attention she gave to any medical diagnosis. "And recently, I have sustained myself primarily on animal blood. It is less nourishing, requires more frequent feeding, but it allows me to avoid taking human life entirely." That must be difficult. Thorne turned from the window to stare at her. Difficult? Eleanor, I have just confessed to being a creature that feeds on human blood, and you respond with sympathy for the inconvenience this causes me? You've also confessed to choosing a more difficult path in order to preserve human life, Eleanor pointed out. That suggests a moral character that deserves respect, not condemnation. You truly are not afraid of me. I'm afraid of many things, Eleanor said honestly. I'm afraid of failing to save the people in my village. I'm afraid of facing the rest of my life alone after losing my husband. I'm afraid of not being skilled enough or brave enough to live up to the calling I've chosen. She paused, meeting his incredulous gaze. But I am not afraid of a man who saved my life when he could have taken it, who shares his knowledge freely to help others, who carries centuries of grief with such dignity. I am not a man, Eleanor. I am a monster who has learned to mimic human decency. You are a person who has retained his humanity despite circumstances that would have destroyed a lesser soul, Eleanor corrected firmly. And if you're willing, you are someone who could help me save my village from this plague. The offer hung between them, an invitation to partnership that acknowledged everything he had revealed while offering acceptance rather than rejection. Thorne studied her face for a long moment, seeming to search for any sign of hidden fear or ulterior motive. You would trust me to work among the people you've sworn to protect? I would trust you, Eleanor said simply, because you have already proven yourself trustworthy. Their first venture into Raven's Hollow together took place under cover of darkness, when Thorne's supernatural nature would draw less attention and his enhanced abilities could be used more freely. Eleanor led the way through paths she knew by heart, carrying supplies they had prepared together, remedies that combined her traditional knowledge with his centuries of accumulated wisdom. The village was worse than Eleanor had feared. In the week since she had left, seeking help, the plague had claimed a dozen more lives. Families huddled in their homes, afraid to venture out except for the most desperate necessities. The streets that had once bustled with daily commerce now lay empty, except for the occasional figure hurrying between shadows, a cloth held over their face against the miasma they believed carried death. Their first call was to the miller's house, where 3 children lay fevered while their parents kept helpless vigil. Eleanor knocked softly and identified herself, and the door opened to reveal a woman whose eyes held the hollow look of someone who had already begun to mourn. "Eleanor," Martha whispered, pulling her inside quickly. "Thank the saints you've returned. The children they're burning up, and nothing I try seems to help." Eleanor introduced Thorne as a learned physician who had agreed to assist her, and Martha was too desperate to question the appearance of this mysterious helper. They worked through the night, Thorne's supernatural senses allowing him to detect subtle changes in the children's conditions that normal observation might miss, while Eleanor provided the human touch and familiar presence that eased the family's fears. The remedies they administered were more effective than anything Eleanor had used before. Thorne's enhanced understanding of disease processes, combined with his access to rare and potent ingredients, created treatments that addressed not just symptoms, but the underlying corruption that drove the plague's advance. By dawn, all 3 children showed marked improvement. Their fevers had broken, their breathing had eased, and they rested peacefully for the first time in days. Martha wept with gratitude, pressing Eleanor's hands between her own and blessing the mysterious physician who had appeared like an answer to prayer. "How did you know?" Eleanor asked as they walked back toward the castle in the pre-dawn darkness. "How were you so certain those particular combinations would work?" "Experience," Thorne replied simply. "I have seen this disease before, in different forms, across many decades. The specific strain varies, but the underlying patterns remain consistent." Eleanor studied his profile in the fading starlight, noting the way he moved with perfect confidence, even in near total darkness. "You've fought plagues before." "Many times. It's one of the few ways I've been able to use my condition for something approaching good, my immunity to disease, my enhanced senses, my accumulated knowledge all become assets when confronting such crises. They continued their nighttime healing missions over the following weeks, working with the efficiency that bordered on miraculous. Word spread cautiously through the village that Eleanor had returned with powerful new remedies and the assistance of a learned doctor who shunned daylight but worked wonders in the darkness. The survival rate among those they treated climbed dramatically, and for the first time since the plague's arrival, hope began to replace despair in Ravenshollow. But the work brought them closer together in ways that transcended professional partnership. Eleanor watched Thorne interact with the sick, his gentle touch with frightened children, his patient explanations to worried parents, his tireless dedication to saving lives, and saw not a monster, but a man whose supernatural abilities had been transformed into instruments of healing. Thorne, for his part, found himself amazed by Eleanor's courage and compassion. Night after night, she entered homes where disease held sway, risking her own health to comfort the suffering. She never hesitated when faced with the most desperate cases, never allowed fear or exhaustion to compromise her care for others. One evening, as they returned from a particularly difficult case where they had managed to save a young mother's life just hours before it would have been too late, Eleanor stumbled with weariness. Thorne caught her easily, his strong arms providing support, and for a moment they stood close together on the moonlit path. "You're exhausted," he said softly. "You cannot continue this pace indefinitely." "Neither can you," Eleanor replied, though she made no move to step away from his embrace. When did you last feed properly?" The question hung between them, acknowledging the cost of his choice to sustain himself on animal blood, while expending enormous energy in their healing work. Thorne's condition was deteriorating, though he tried to hide it from her. "I manage," he said. "That's not an answer." Eleanor reached up to touch his face, noting the increased pallor, the subtle signs of strain around his eyes. "You're weakening yourself to help others, just as I am. The difference is that your weakness will pass with rest. Mine requires... I know what it requires." Eleanor's voice was steady, without fear or revulsion. "And I know you've been avoiding it because of me, because you don't want me to see that side of your nature." Thorne closed his eyes, leaning into her touch despite himself. "You don't understand what you're offering to witness. I understand that you're suffering needlessly." Eleanor moved closer, her healer's instincts overriding any personal discomfort. "There are criminals in the area, men who prey on refugees from the plague, who rob and assault the desperate. If you must feed, let it be on those who have chosen to profit from others' misery." The practical solution, offered without judgment or fear, struck Thorne with unexpected force. Here was a woman who could look at his monstrous needs and find a way to reconcile them with morality, who could accept the darkest aspects of his nature while helping him maintain his humanity. "Eleanor," he whispered, and her name on his lips carried the weight of wonder and growing love. "Yes? What we have this partnership, this understanding, it cannot last forever. You will age and die, while I remain unchanged. Even if we save your entire village, even if we work together for years to come, eventually time will separate us." Eleanor had been thinking the same thing, had lain awake during the daylight hours when Thorne rested, considering the implications of loving someone whose nature placed him beyond the normal cycle of life and death. "I know," she said quietly, "but does that make what we have now less precious? Does the knowledge that flowers will wilt keep us from enjoying their beauty while they bloom?" Thorne opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression of such longing that Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "You would choose this, knowing that it leads to inevitable loss?" "I chose this the moment I fell asleep against your chest," Eleanor replied. "Everything since then has simply been the unfolding of that choice." He kissed her then, there on the moonlit path between the village and his ancient castle, and Eleanor tasted something she had never expected to find again after Thomas's death, the promise of love that transcended ordinary understanding, love that was worth whatever pain might follow. Around her neck, the moonstone pendant he had given her caught the light, its protective runes glowing faintly with power that spoke of magic older than memory, of bonds that might prove stronger than even time itself. The discovery came by accident, as such revelations often do. Eleanor had returned to her cottage on the village outskirts to retrieve additional supplies, medicinal herbs she had stored in her own garden, instruments that might prove useful in their continued work. The small house felt strange after weeks in Thorne's castle, smaller and more mundane than she remembered, filled with ghosts of her former life. She was gathering dried lavender from the rafters when her foot caught on a loose floorboard near the hearth. Thomas had always meant to fix it, she remembered with a pang of familiar grief. She knelt to press it back into place, and noticed that it shifted more than it should, as if something beneath had shifted its position. Curiosity drove her to pry up the board completely, expecting to find the usual debris that accumulated in such spaces, perhaps a mouse nest or some small item that had fallen through the cracks. Instead, her fingers encountered the rough texture of leather, and she pulled out a wrapped bundle that had clearly been deliberately hidden. The leather was oiled and treated to protect whatever lay within. Eleanor unwrapped it carefully, revealing a collection of items that made no immediate sense. Sheets of parchment, covered with Thomas's careful handwriting, a small wooden cross carved with symbols she didn't recognize, a vial of what appeared to be holy water, and most puzzling of all, a bundle of wooden stakes sharpened to deadly points. Eleanor's hands shook as she unfolded the parchment and began to read Thomas's familiar script. What she found there challenged everything she thought she knew about the man she had loved, the life they had shared, the very foundation of her understanding. Asterisk. Third month of observations, asterisk, the first page began. Asterisk. The creature maintains his territory in the ancient castle overlooking Raven's Hollow. Local legends speak of a reclusive lord, but my research suggests something far more dangerous. The pattern of disappearances in surrounding areas, the reports of strange phenomena, the unnatural longevity of the stories themselves, all point to the presence of a vampire of considerable age and power. Asterisk. Eleanor's blood went cold as she read on, her husband's methodical notes revealing a secret life she had never suspected. Thomas had not been the simple village tradesman she had believed, but something far more complex, a hunter of supernatural creatures, a man dedicated to tracking and destroying what he saw as threats to humanity. Asterisk. The vampire appears to feed with restraint. Asterisk. Another entry noted. Asterisk. Unlike the ravenous monsters described in most accounts, this creature seems to follow some code of conduct, taking life sparingly and selecting victims who will not be greatly missed. This suggests either great age and corresponding wisdom, or some remnant of human conscience that has survived the transformation. Either possibility makes it more dangerous, not less. A thinking predator is infinitely more challenging than a mindless one. Asterisk. Page after page detailed Thomas's patient investigation. He had mapped Thorne's territory, documented the subtle signs of supernatural presence, even sketched what appeared to be floor plans of the castle's lower levels. The depth of his knowledge was staggering, accumulated over what must have been years of careful observation. Asterisk. I have identified what I believe to be the optimal approach route. Asterisk 1. Of the later entries, stated. Asterisk. The eastern wall shows signs of structural weakness that could provide access to the inner chambers. The creature appears to be most vulnerable during daylight hours, though I have found no evidence of the traditional weakness to sunlight described in folklore. Silver and holy symbols seem to have minimal effect, suggesting this is an older strain of vampirism, one that predates the development of such protections. Asterisk. Eleanor's hands trembled as she turned to the final entries, dated just days before Thomas's death. The writing became more urgent, more desperate, revealing a man driven by purpose she was only now beginning to understand. Asterisk, Eleanor grows suspicious of my absences. Asterisk, he had written. Asterisk. I have been forced to use the plague as explanation for my nighttime excursions, telling her I am checking on isolated farmsteads. The deception weighs on me, but she must be protected from this knowledge. If something happens to me, if the creature proves more dangerous than anticipated, she must never know the truth of what I was attempting. Asterisk. The final entry was dated the night before his death. Asterisk. Tonight I make my attempt. The creature has grown careless, venturing closer to the village than usual. I have tracked it to a cave system north of the castle, where it appears to rest during daylight. If my calculations are correct, I will have several hours to complete my work before it awakens. If I fail, if this journal is found, let it serve as warning to any who would continue this hunt. The creature is old, powerful, and far more intelligent than the legends suggest. It will not be destroyed easily. Asterisk, asterisk, God forgive me for the deception, but Eleanor is safer believing I died of plague than knowing I perished in battle with a monster. Let her remember me as the simple man she married, not the hunter I became. Asterisk, Eleanor sat back on her heels, the journal falling from nerveless fingers. Thomas had died not from plague as she had believed, but in pursuit of the very creature who had saved her life, who had become her partner in healing, who had awakened in her feelings she thought lost forever. The irony was devastating. Her husband had spent years tracking Thorne with lethal intent, while she had found in the vampire everything she valued most: compassion, wisdom, dedication to preserving life rather than destroying it. The man she mourned had been the mortal enemy of the man she was learning to love. But even as the revelation shattered her understanding of the past, more immediate concerns demanded attention. If Thomas had been this thorough in his research, if he had been part of some larger network of hunters, then others would know of his work. Others might even now be following his trail, seeking to complete what he had started. She gathered the papers with shaking hands, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. Should she tell Thorne? Should she warn him that his secret might already be known to forces dedicated to his destruction? Or should she protect him by keeping this knowledge to herself, allowing him to believe that Thomas had died ignorant of his true nature? The decision became more complicated when she found the final item hidden beneath the floorboard, a leather pouch containing correspondence that made her heart sink with dread. Letters from someone identified only as Brother Marcus, written in the formal style of religious correspondence, but clearly dealing with supernatural matters. Asterisk, Brother Thomas. Asterisk, one letter began, Asterisk, your reports on the Ravenshollow situation have been noted by the Council. We agree that the creature you describe poses significant threat despite its apparent restraint. The pattern you have identified, the controlled feeding, the territorial behavior, the longevity of the haunting, suggests a vampire of the old bloodlines, possibly one of the original spawn. Asterisk, asterisk. We are dispatching a full hunting party to assist in the creature's destruction. They should reach your area within the fortnight. Continue your surveillance, but attempt no action until reinforcements arrive. A vampire of such age and power is not to be confronted alone. Asterisk. Eleanor's blood turned to ice as she read the date on the letter. It had arrived the day before Thomas's death, which meant he had attempted his hunt knowing that help was coming, knowing that he need only wait a few more days for trained assistance. Why had he acted alone? What had driven him to such desperate haste? The answer came in his final note, scrawled hastily on the back of the letter. Asterisk. Eleanor grows weaker. The plague may take her before help arrives. If she dies while I delay action against the creature whose presence may be contributing to the disease, I will never forgive myself. Better to risk everything in an attempt to save her than to lose her through inaction. Asterisk. The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Thomas had died trying to save her from a threat that existed only in his imagination, believing that Thorne's presence somehow contributed to the plague's virulence. He had thrown away his life in a misguided attempt to protect her from the very person who would ultimately become her salvation. And now, according to the correspondence, trained vampire hunters were coming to Raven's Hollow. They would be expecting to find Thomas's continued reports, would expect him to guide them to their target. When they discovered his death, they would begin their own investigation, and how long before that investigation led them to the truth about Eleanor's miraculous recovery, about the mysterious physician who worked only at night? Eleanor forced herself to think clearly, despite the chaos of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She had to warn Thorne, had to give him the chance to flee before the hunters arrived. But she also had to decide what this revelation meant for her own feelings, her own choices. Did it matter that the man she was learning to love had been the intended victim of the husband she had mourned? Did Thomas's mistaken crusade invalidate the connection she felt with Thorne, the partnership they had built in service to life rather than death? As she wrapped the journal and its damning contents back in their protective leather, Eleanor realized that the discovery had clarified rather than complicated her loyalties. Thomas had been a good man, driven by fear and misconception to hunt something he didn't understand. Thorne was a complex being who had chosen to use his supernatural nature in service of others, who had saved her life when he could have taken it. The past could not be changed. Thomas was dead, his mission unfulfilled. But the future was still hers to shape, and she would shape it in defense of love, understanding, and the healing partnership that had already saved so many lives in Raven's Hollow. The hunters were coming, but they would not find their prey defenseless or alone. Eleanor returned to the castle with Thomas's journal burning like a brand against her chest, hidden beneath her cloak where its weight seemed to press against her heart with every step. The evening mist clung to the hillsides as she climbed the familiar path, but tonight the shadows seemed to hold watching eyes, and every rustle of wind through the trees made her start with apprehension. Thorne was waiting for her in his study, bent over a collection of manuscripts that dealt with advanced plague treatments. He looked up as she entered, and his expression immediately shifted from welcome to concern as he took in her pale complexion and trembling hands. "What has happened?" he asked, rising from his chair with fluid grace. "Eleanor, you look as though you've seen a ghost." The irony of his words almost broke her composure entirely. She had indeed seen ghosts, the ghost of her husband's secret life, the spectre of deception that had haunted her marriage, the phantom of danger that now stalked them both. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About Thomas. About you. About things I've discovered that change everything." Thorne's expression grew wary, and Eleanor saw him tense in the way she had learned to recognize when his supernatural instincts detected potential threat. "What kind of things?" Rather than answer directly, Eleanor withdrew the leather-wrapped journal from beneath her cloak and set it on the table between them. The simple action seemed to fill the room with foreboding, as if she had placed a loaded weapon within reach. "I found this hidden in my cottage," she said. "Thomas wasn't who I thought he was. Our marriage wasn't what I believed it to be. And the danger to you is far greater than either of us imagined." Thorne stared at the journal for a long moment before reaching out to unwrap it with careful fingers. Eleanor watched his face as he read, saw the subtle changes in his expression as the truth revealed itself surprise, giving way to understanding hardening into something approaching despair. "How long?" he asked when he had finished reading the most damning passages. "Years, apparently. He'd been tracking you since before our marriage, maybe since before he even met me." Eleanor sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted by the weight of revelation. "I never suspected. All those nights he said he was checking on distant farms. All those absences he blamed on helping plague victims, he was hunting you." "He came close," Thorne admitted, his voice carefully neutral. Several times over the past few years, I sensed someone observing the castle, following my movements. I attributed it to curiosity about the reclusive lord, never suspecting organized surveillance. The night he died, Eleanor's voice caught, but she forced herself to continue. He wasn't taken by plague, was he? He came for you. Thorne nodded slowly. I found him in the cave system, where I sometimes rest during difficult daylight hours. He was armed with the traditional weapons, stakes, holy water, silver blades, but he was also sick, weakened by the very plague he believed I was causing. He fought bravely, but he was no match for me in his condition. I could have killed him easily. But you didn't. No. I disarmed him, left him unconscious but alive. When I returned the next evening to ensure he had made his way safely back to the village, I found that the fever had taken him in the night. He died believing he had failed in his mission to save you from a monster. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling tears slide down her cheeks for the tragedy of it all. Thomas, dying in pursuit of a threat that existed only in his imagination. Thorne showing mercy to someone who had come to destroy him, herself caught between two men who had loved her in their different ways. "The hunters are coming," she said, when she could trust her voice again. According to the correspondence, a full hunting party was dispatched to assist Thomas. They should have arrived by now, or will arrive soon. How many? The letters don't specify, but they refer to a full party and mention that you're considered exceptionally dangerous. Probably at least half a dozen trained fighters, possibly more. Thorne was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire with the expression of someone calculating odds and possibilities. They will expect to find Thomas's continued reports, evidence of ongoing surveillance. When they discover his death, they will begin their own investigation. And how long before that investigation leads them to me? To the mysterious physician who appeared just as the plague began to recede, who works only at night and shows impossible skill in healing arts. Not long, Thorne admitted. You've become too visible, Eleanor. Too many people in the village have seen us working together, have benefited from remedies that no normal healer could provide. If the hunters are competent, and if they represent the organization Thomas belonged to, they will be. It's only a matter of time before they connect your recovery and our partnership. Eleanor leaned forward, studying his face in the firelight. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that I should leave, Thorne said quietly. Tonight, before they arrive. Disappear back into the wilderness, find some remote corner of the world where I can wait out another few centuries until this threat passes. And abandon the village. Abandon the people we've been saving. Better that than lead vampire hunters to your door. Eleanor, if they discover your connection to me, you'll be branded as my accomplice, possibly as someone I've corrupted with supernatural influence. They won't distinguish between willing cooperation and supernatural coercion. Eleanor felt a surge of anger at his words, at the suggestion that she would meekly accept his departure and return to her former life of limited healing knowledge and acceptable failure rates. And what if I don't want you to leave? Your wants are irrelevant if you're dead, Thorne replied bluntly. These aren't village folk with torches and pitchforks, Eleanor. These are trained professionals who have dedicated their lives to hunting creatures like me. They know our strengths and weaknesses, our patterns and habits. They will not be fooled by misdirection or deterred by ordinary obstacles. Then we'll have to be extraordinary, Eleanor said firmly. You know this terrain better than any outsider could. You have abilities they can't match and knowledge they don't possess. And you have something they won't expect, a human ally who understands both their methods and your nature. Thorne stared at her with something approaching disbelief. You're suggesting we fight them. I'm suggesting we defend ourselves and protect the work we've been doing. The plague is nearly contained, Thorne. In another few weeks, we could have it completely eliminated from the region. Are we supposed to abandon that achievement, let people die who could be saved, because some misguided hunters can't distinguish between a monster and a healer? Eleanor, you don't understand what you're proposing. Even if we could defeat them, and that's far from certain, killing vampire hunters will bring more hunters. Their organization won't simply accept the loss of a full party. They'll send reinforcements, investigators, possibly entire armies, if they believe the threat warrants it. Then we don't kill them, Eleanor said simply. We convince them. Convince them of what? That a vampire who feeds on human blood is actually a benevolent healer? That their entire worldview is based on misunderstanding and prejudice? Why not? Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her mind racing through possibilities. Thomas's journal proves that even trained hunters can be wrong about their targets. He spent years observing you, documenting your behavior, and still completely misunderstood your nature and motivations. Maybe it's time someone showed them the truth. And if they refuse to listen? If they decide that any vampire is a vampire too many, regardless of moral behavior? Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I won't abandon you to face this alone, and I won't let fear drive us apart when we've accomplished so much together. Thorne rose from his chair and moved to the window. Gazing out at the darkness that held no secrets from his supernatural vision, you realize this could mean your death. If we're discovered, if our partnership is revealed, you'll be branded as my thrall or accomplice. They won't show mercy to someone they believe has been corrupted by vampire influence. And you realize that running won't solve anything, Eleanor replied. They'll keep hunting you, keep following old trails and investigating old rumors. How many more villages will suffer while you hide in the wilderness? How many people will die from diseases you could have cured if you hadn't been driven into exile? So what do you propose? Eleanor stood and moved to join him at the window, looking out over the village where lights burned in windows that would have stood dark without their intervention. We prepare. We use every advantage we have, your knowledge of the terrain, your supernatural abilities, my understanding of human nature. And when they come, we meet them not as monsters and victims, but as healers defending their work. It's dangerous beyond measure. So was climbing to your castle in the middle of a plague storm, Eleanor pointed out. So was trusting a vampire with my life. So was choosing to love someone whose nature places him outside normal human understanding. I've been making dangerous choices since the night I first sought you out, Thorne. This is just one more. Thorne was quiet for a long time, and Eleanor could almost hear him thinking, weighing options and calculating risks with the precision that came from centuries of careful survival. When he finally spoke, his voice held a note of resignation mixed with something that might have been hope. If we do this, if we choose to stand and fight rather than run, there's no turning back. Win or lose, everything changes after this confrontation. Everything already changed the night you chose to save me instead of feed on me, Eleanor replied softly. We've just been discovering the implications ever since. Thorne turned from the window to look at her, and in his grey eyes Eleanor saw the reflection of her own determination, her own refusal to accept defeat without a fight. Then we prepare for war, he said quietly, but we prepare as healers, not monsters. Whatever happens, whatever we have to do to survive this, we don't lose sight of who we've chosen to be. Eleanor took his hand, feeling the familiar coolness of his skin against her palm. Agreed. Now, what do we know about vampire hunting tactics, and how can we turn them to our advantage? The hunters came at dawn, just as Thorne had predicted they would. Eleanor spotted them from the castle's eastern tower, where she had maintained watch through the pre-dawn hours, while Thorne rested in the deeper chambers below. 6 figures in dark traveling cloaks, moving with the disciplined coordination of trained soldiers, following the same approach route that Thomas had mapped in his journal. She rang the warning bell they had prepared, 3 sharp tolls that echoed through the castle's stone corridors, the signal that would bring Thorne from his refuge despite the approaching sunrise. Their week of preparation had been intensive, transforming the ancient stronghold into a fortress designed to protect rather than merely intimidate. The hunters paused at the castle's outer gates, and Eleanor could see them examining the ground where she had once collapsed in desperation. Their leader, a tall man with greying hair and the bearing of a military commander, gestured to his companions, and they began to spread out in a practiced encirclement pattern. Eleanor descended quickly to the main hall, where Thorne emerged from the lower levels with supernatural speed despite the obvious discomfort that daylight caused him. His face was paler than usual, his movements slightly stiff, but his grey eyes held the focused intensity of someone prepared for battle. 6 of them, approaching from multiple directions, Eleanor reported tersely. The leader appears to be the man from the correspondent's brother Marcus, I think. They're armed with the traditional weapons, but also carrying items I don't recognize. Thorne nodded grimly. Blessed weapons, probably. Holy water treated with specific rituals, silver that's been consecrated in ways designed to maximize harm to supernatural creatures. The Church has refined its methods considerably over the centuries. They had prepared for this moment, but the reality of armed men surrounding their sanctuary sent adrenaline coursing through Eleanor's system. She checked the arrangement of medical supplies they had positioned throughout the main hall, not just for treating potential injuries, but as evidence of their healing work, proof of the lives they had saved. Remember, Thorne said softly, we tried diplomacy first. Let them see what we've accomplished. Let them understand that their assumptions about my nature are flawed. And if they refuse to listen, then we defend ourselves with whatever means necessary. A sharp knock echoed through the hall, delivered with the authority of someone accustomed to having doors opened at their command. Eleanor and Thorne exchanged a look that carried the weight of everything they had shared. Their partnership in healing, their growing love, their mutual decision to stand together against this threat. Eleanor moved to answer the door, with Thorne positioning himself where he could be seen but not immediately threatened. The ancient portal swung open to reveal Brother Marcus and 2 of his companions, while the others remained positioned to prevent escape. Lady Eleanor Hartwell, Marcus said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to interrogation. I am Brother Marcus of the Order of St. Michael. We have come seeking information about your late husband's investigation into supernatural threats in this region. Eleanor met his gaze steadily, drawing on every lesson Thomas had unknowingly taught her about maintaining composure under pressure. Brother Marcus, Thomas spoke of you in his letters. Please come inside. There is much we need to discuss. Marcus stepped across the threshold, his eyes immediately scanning the hall and noting Thorne's presence in the shadows. Eleanor saw recognition flicker across his features, the trained observer cataloguing details that confirmed his suspicions. Lord Thorne, I presume, Marcus said, his hand moving with practiced ease to rest on the hilt of a weapon concealed beneath his cloak. We have been seeking you for quite some time. I imagine you have, Thorne replied calmly, moving forward into the light despite the obvious discomfort it caused him. Though I suspect your understanding of why you seek me may be incomplete. Our understanding, said one of Marcus's companions, a younger man whose zealous expression suggested little patience for nuance, is that you are an abomination that feeds on human blood and corrupts everything you touch. The evidence of your victim's corruption stands before us. The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. Eleanor felt anger rise in her chest at the casual dismissal of her agency, the assumption that her choices could only be explained by supernatural coercion. Evidence of corruption? She said, her voice sharp with indignation. Brother Marcus, before you make such accusations, perhaps you should examine the actual evidence of what has occurred in Ravenshollow since your arrival was delayed. She gestured toward the collection of medical supplies, the careful notes documenting treatment successes, the testimonials from grateful families. The plague that was destroying this village has been virtually eliminated. Children who would have died, now play in the streets. Families that faced complete devastation have been restored to health and hope. Through supernatural means, Marcus replied, though Eleanor noticed uncertainty creeping into his voice. Through methods that violate natural order and divine law. Through superior medical knowledge and tireless dedication to preserving life, Eleanor corrected firmly. Methods that your own church has used when it served their purposes, techniques that save lives regardless of their source. The young zealot stepped forward aggressively. She speaks with the voice of corruption, Brother Marcus. The vampire's influence has clearly. His words were cut short as Thorne moved with inhuman speed, not to attack, but to position himself protectively between Eleanor and the advancing hunter. The movement was so fluid, so obviously beyond human capability, that even Marcus took an involuntary step backward. "Gentlemen," Thorne said, his voice carrying the authority of centuries, "you have come here expecting to find a monster's lair. Instead, you have found a hospital. You came seeking evidence of evil, and found proof of healing. Perhaps it is time to question whether your assumptions about the nature of good and evil are as clear as you believed." The tension in the hall crackled like lightning before a storm. Eleanor could see the internal struggle playing out across Brother Marcus's weathered features, the conflict between ingrained doctrine and the evidence of his own eyes. The other hunters remained poised for violence, hands on weapons, but their leader's hesitation stayed their advance. "You speak of healing," Marcus said slowly, "yet you are an abomination that feeds on human blood. How do you reconcile these contradictions?" "The same way your order reconciles taking life in service of what you believe to be a greater good," Thorne replied. "Through careful choice, moral restraint, and dedication to principles that transcend mere survival." Eleanor stepped forward, drawing both men's attention. From beneath her cloak, she withdrew Catherine's locket, the precious memento that Thorne had given her during their battle preparations, a symbol of love transcending death. "Brother Marcus," she said, holding the locket where all could see it, "this belonged to Thorne's wife, who died of plague 3 centuries ago. She was a healer, like myself. He has carried her memory for 300 years. Using the knowledge she inspired him to gather in service of saving others from the disease that took her." The locket caught the morning light streaming through the windows, and Eleanor saw something shift in Marcus's expression, perhaps recognition of genuine grief, perhaps simply the human response to artifacts of enduring love. 3 centuries, the young zealot scoffed. More evidence of unnatural corruption, of existence that defies divine will, or evidence of love that transcends the normal boundaries of life and death, Eleanor replied firmly. "Tell me, Brother Marcus, in your years of hunting supernatural creatures, have you ever encountered one who used his abilities primarily to preserve life rather than take it?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Eleanor sensed that her question had struck something deeper than theological argument. "No," he admitted finally, "we have not." "Then, perhaps," Thorne said quietly, "this encounter offers an opportunity to expand your understanding of what is possible." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring until the sound of voices from outside broke the spell. Eleanor recognized them. Immediately, villagers from Ravenshollow, approaching the castle with urgent purpose. Through the windows, she could see a small crowd gathering at the gates, led by Martha, the miller's wife, whose children they had saved. "Lady Eleanor," Martha's voice carried clearly through the morning air. "Lady Eleanor, are you well? We saw the armed men, and we feared—" Marcus turned sharply toward the windows, his trained instincts recognizing the potential threat of an aroused population. But as the villager's words became clearer, his expression shifted to confusion. "She saved our children," one voice declared. "The fever would have taken them all, if not for her and the learned doctor." "My grandmother was dying," called another. "Nothing we tried helped until they came with their remedies." "The plague has left us completely," Martha added, her voice carrying the fervor of absolute conviction. "For the first time in months, no one in Ravenshollow lies sick with the fever. They worked miracles among us." Eleanor saw the moment when understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes, the recognition that the villagers spoke not of supernatural corruption, but of genuine gratitude, of lives saved through medical intervention that transcended normal capabilities. "You see," Eleanor said softly, "the evidence of our work is not hidden in shadows or shrouded in mystery. It walks and breathes and plays in the sunlight of a village that would have been devastated without our intervention." The young zealot moved toward his weapons, unwilling to accept the evidence before his eyes. Corruption can take many forms. These people may believe themselves helped, while actually enough. Marcus's command cut through his subordinate's words with absolute authority. "Stand down, all of you." He turned to face Thorne directly, and Eleanor held her breath as two men who represented completely different worlds studied each other across the space that separated human and supernatural understanding. "You could have killed Thomas easily," Marcus said. "It was not a question." "Yes," Thorne replied honestly, "but killing him would have served no purpose beyond satisfying bloodlust. He was sick, desperate, acting from love and fear rather than genuine malice. Mercy seemed more appropriate than vengeance, and you could kill us now, despite our training and preparation. Possibly. But again, what purpose would that serve? You came here seeking a monster, Brother Marcus. Instead, you found two healers who have dedicated themselves to preserving life. Killing you would make me the monster you expected to find." Marcus nodded slowly, and Eleanor saw decision crystallizing in his expression. From within his cloak, he withdrew a bundle of wooden stakes, the consecrated weapons designed specifically for vampire destruction. With deliberate ceremony, he set them on the floor between himself and Thorne. "The Order of St. Michael," he said formally, "was founded to protect humanity from supernatural threats. But protection sometimes means recognizing when something supernatural serves rather than threatens human welfare." His companions stared at him in shock, but Marcus continued without wavering. "Lord Thorne, Lady Eleanor, your work in Ravenshollow stands as evidence that our understanding of supernatural evil has been incomplete. You have proven that creatures of darkness can choose to serve the light." Eleanor felt tears of relief and gratitude prick her eyes as the immediate threat dissolved into something approaching acceptance. "Thank you, Brother Marcus. Your wisdom honors your order." "What do we tell the council?" the young zealot demanded. "How do we explain returning without completing our mission?" Marcus looked again at the locket in Eleanor's hands, at the medical supplies arranged throughout the hall, at the faces of grateful villagers visible through the windows. "We tell them the truth," he said simply, "that we found something that challenged our assumptions and expanded our understanding of what is possible in the war between good and evil." 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the castle's highest tower, watching the sun set over a village that thrived with renewed life. Ravenshollow had not merely survived the plague, it had emerged stronger, more resilient, with a population that understood the value of life in ways that only those who have faced death truly can. The vampire hunters had departed with promises of discretion and a new understanding of the complexities that existed in their ancient war. Brother Marcus had proven true to his word, sending carefully worded reports to his superiors that spoke of threats, neutralized, and supernatural influences contained, without specifying the exact nature of the resolution. Eleanor had chosen to remain in the castle rather than return to her cottage in the village. The decision had been easy once she acknowledged what her heart had known for months, that her future lay not in the past she had shared with Thomas, but in the unprecedented partnership she had built with Thorne. They had crafted new wedding rings together in the castle's ancient forge, simple bands that bore no resemblance to the elaborate jewelry of nobility, but held meaning that transcended precious metals. Eleanor wore hers constantly now, a visible symbol of a commitment that existed beyond the normal boundaries of human understanding. The question of transformation had been discussed, but ultimately set aside. Eleanor had surprised herself by choosing to remain mortal, to accept the natural span of years allotted to human life, rather than seeking the eternal existence that Thorne's bite could provide. Her reasoning was simple. She had learned that love's value lay not in its duration, but in its depth, not in endless time, but in meaningful moments. "You're certain?" Thorne had asked, when she shared her decision. "You understand what this choice means, that our time together will be measured in decades rather than centuries." "I understand," Eleanor had replied, taking his cool hands in her warm ones. "But I also understand that trying to hold on to something forever can prevent us from fully experiencing it in the present. I would rather love you completely for a human lifetime than spend eternity wondering if my feelings were authentic or simply the result of supernatural transformation." Thorne had accepted her choice with the grace of someone who had learned that love sometimes meant accepting what you could not change. Instead of lamenting the brevity of their time together, they had committed themselves to making each moment count. Their work in the region had expanded beyond simple medical treatment. Word had spread quietly through networks of healers and scholars about the remarkable recoveries taking place in Ravenshollow, and they had begun receiving visitors, physicians seeking to learn new techniques, researchers investigating the boundaries between natural and supernatural healing, even representatives from distant communities facing their own medical crises. Eleanor had become something of a teacher herself, sharing the knowledge that Thorne had given her while carefully editing out any details that might raise uncomfortable questions about its source. She had discovered a gift for instruction that rivaled her skill in direct patient care, and their castle had begun to transform into something approaching a school of advanced medicine. Thorne, meanwhile, had found a purpose that transcended mere survival for the first time in centuries. His supernatural abilities, channeled through Eleanor's moral compass and practical wisdom, had become instruments of genuine good in ways he had never imagined possible. The guilt that had shadowed his existence since his transformation had not disappeared, but it had been balanced by the undeniable evidence of lives saved and suffering alleviated. "The Council wants to send an observer," Eleanor said as Thorne joined her in the tower, moving to stand behind her with his arms circling her waist. "Brother Marcus's reports have generated considerable interest in our methods." "Are you comfortable with that level of scrutiny?" Thorne asked, his breath cool against her ear. "As long as they come seeking knowledge rather than confirmation of their prejudices," Eleanor replied, leaning back against his solid presence. Marcus chose well. In his reporting, he emphasized the medical achievements while leaving the supernatural aspects vague enough to avoid triggering automatic hostility. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the western sky. Below them, the village glowed with the warm light of hearth fires and oil lamps, evidence of families gathered safely together at the end of another day. It was a sight that never failed to move Eleanor, the simple miracle of ordinary life continuing, of children growing up, healthy, of parents watching their families thrive rather than merely survive. "Do you regret it?" Thorne asked softly. "The choice to bind yourself to someone whose nature will always place him outside normal human society?" Eleanor turned in his arms to face him, noting how the evening light softened his pale features and made his grey eyes seem almost silver. "Do you regret the choice to bind yourself to someone whose mortality means you'll watch her age and die while you remain unchanged?" "Never," Thorne replied without hesitation. "Every moment with you has been worth whatever pain may follow." "Then you have your answer," Eleanor said, rising on her toes to kiss him gently. "I fell asleep against your chest that first night because something in your touch told me I was safe. Everything that followed has simply confirmed what I knew instinctively, that some connections transcend ordinary understanding." As full darkness settled over the valley, they made their way down from the tower to begin their evening rounds. There were always patients to check, preparations to make, letters to answer from distant colleagues seeking advice. Their life together had become a rhythm of purposeful activity, punctuated by moments of quiet intimacy, a partnership that served something greater than their individual desires, while fulfilling them in ways neither had expected. In the great hall, Eleanor paused before Catherine's portrait, which now hung openly among the castle's decorations rather than hidden in a cabinet. She felt no jealousy toward the woman who had inspired Thorne's capacity for love, only gratitude for the example of compassion and dedication that had shaped the man she had chosen to spend her life with. "She would have approved," Thorne said, following her gaze to the painted face that still seemed to glow with inner life. "I think so too," Eleanor agreed. "I think she would have understood that love multiplies rather than divides, that honoring one relationship doesn't diminish another." Hand in hand, they moved toward the preparations for another night of healing work, their footsteps echoing through corridors that had once known only isolation but now rang with purpose and partnership. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall. Not the desperate storm that had driven Eleanor to seek shelter, but the kind of steady precipitation that nourished growing things and promised continued renewal. Sometimes the loneliest souls do find each other in the darkest moments. Sometimes trust blooms where fear should reign. And sometimes, when two people choose to see the person rather than the monster, love proves stronger than the forces that seek to keep them apart.